Great, so we're here obviously to talk about VR and mass market VR. Now, Tommy, you started coding as a hobbyist in 1986 on a Commodore 64. It was 1999 when you went professional with Jadestone. And yeah, as mentioned, obviously Tommy eventually found himself at King and made Candy Crush, or was significant in making Candy Crush Saga, the success it was. Also co-founder of the wonderful Stugan game developer, kind of incubator slash Woodland Getaway. And now CEO, founder and a game designer, I think importantly, at Resolution Games. When in that kind of history with games did you first come across VR the very first time, and kind of, I guess, very honestly, what were your very first thoughts about virtual reality?
Yeah, I was very lucky. I was super interested in games from a very early start. On a skiing vacation when I was about 7, I played Space Invaders on an arcade machine in Maribel in France. At that time, there was no arcade machines in Sweden yet, but it came eventually, and I was super hooked on it. And interestingly enough, I tried on the skiing vacation, I tried an arcade machine with VR. Right. So I think there was only 300 made, according to what I see on Wiki, and Wikipedia, and one of them were in Sweden. Right. So I tried so originally designed as a multiplayer game, but there was only one machine in Sweden, so you couldn't play it as that. As Dorsettil Nightmare, I think it was called. And you'd shoot robots in space. And you paid 10 euros to try it out. And people were interested, but I was blown away. I thought that, finally something that was like Tron, you would be completely surrounded with the game world. Obviously, you get extremely nauseous in early 90s on the very, very low frame rate and extremely stylized graphics, if you can call it that. But I thought it was showing what we would see later on in the 90s, perhaps it's going to be in everybody's home. Obviously, it took a lot longer time than expected, but starting from last year, 2016, we actually have consumer-ready devices with VR. So it's been extremely fun to be able to, we started Resolution Games in 2015, and be able to experiment a lot and work on the type of games that we thought would work. Yeah. And I don't know if we have worked through about 50 different game prototypes, many of them looking back quite stupid ideas that felt that would be a very good idea. I think we started off like many other people with like a free flying around 360 degrees of freedom, nauseating experience, and then we kind of took it down many steps from there.
Great, so there's your first lesson already from a real guru of this kind of thing, is make lots and lots of mistakes, first of all. So yeah, I guess it was only 2012, actually that's quite a long time ago now, but 2012 was the Oculus Kickstarter, and since then, until maybe a year or two ago, VR was very hardcore. You needed a powerful PC, you needed to be able to prepare to invest quite a lot, and it was almost a platform by developers for developers. Obviously now with Daydream and before that Cardboard and Gear VR, there is this potential for very, very mass market VR. So I guess before we go into the details of that, it would just be interesting to hear your case for why you believe VR can become truly mass market, and I guess what mass market VR means to you.
All right. So I think this is a very interesting question, and we are at Casual Connect, and we're looking at making casual games in general. I think, especially if you look at VR right now, there is nothing casual about VR, but I think we will come to that point. One of the things that I'm very impressed with VR is that it's a very, very intuitive experience, if made well. You've seen some example of a chimpanzee trying VR goggles, and if nothing else, that shows that it can be very intuitive to understand what VR can bring us. It's basically just a virtual world that we control to 100%. So that start is very exciting. Then there is certainly a very big challenge from going from something which has a high price point, requires a lot of performance, and then developing extremely complex software on top of that and making sure that it's something meaningful to do. I still think there's a huge discrepancy between what you see and hear and to what you can, how your interaction is in VR. With the Oculus Touch controllers, that is like the first more or less semi-intuitive controllers where you can see your hands. That makes a lot of difference when you reach out and touch things. And it's just so interesting to me to see how that impacts what type of experience you can do. For me, trying out the toy box demo that Oculus did as a social experience was really an eye-opener on how exciting and how intuitive VR can be when you have your hands there. It takes a little time to learn to use those controllers, so they're not as intuitive as your hand yet. And I don't see a good solution where you can reach out and touch something yet, but you are, at least if you have your hands, you can interact with a book and a pen and a mobile phone, anything that you have a prior knowledge of, and bring that with you in a very casual way.
So with Resolution's existing games, I mean, obviously Tommy can tell you more about them than I can, but Bait, very successful, I'd say very relaxing fishing game, recently hit 1 million downloads last month, is that correct? And now Wonderglade. How have you, kind of talking then about some of the challenges to do with hardware and interaction, but at the same time you are already making casually leaning games for current VR platforms. So how have you approached that? How have Resolution endeavoured to make their games mass market, considering current technology's limitations?
Well, one of the things that I felt I discovered and got proven for myself working with smartphone games is that once you make your games very accessible, you can open up the target group of gamers to a lot more people than the traditional kind of hardcore following that is on console. So that's something that we've been trying to take with us and make sure that it's very easy to get into the games. And the fishing game is a great example of that, where a lot of people have some sort of prior knowledge to how you fish, and it's the actual interaction mechanics is simple. And then with Wonderglade, we have taken a kind of mini-game approach to introducing the Daydream platform and the controller, and using it in many different ways, but still a way that you would very quickly be up and running if you want to show the game to your friend. Stephanie was talking about how important that first experience is, and I definitely believe that's true. People, when they try VR for the first time, that's always fun to be there. You know that they're going to remember that moment for the rest of their life, most likely. And hopefully you can help them make it into a positive moment. You don't want to show them a roller coaster experience where they go out like wobbling out of there and not feeling that they want to do it again. But still think there is a huge challenge. People love seeing it for the first time. Second time they're like, well, I already tested it. I sat next to the Swedish king on the plane once, and he's really into fishing. And this was when we were doing the fishing game. And I spoke mostly to his right-hand man, and I showed him the fishing game, and he said, hey, kungen, which is in Swedish, said, the king, you know, you have to try this game. It's you love it. And he was like, no, I already tried it. It's like, no, it's a fishing game, you have to try it. He said, no, I already tried it. And I don't know if he had a bad experience first time he tried it, but he didn't want to try it again. And I definitely recognize that from a lot of people. You feel the first time is very exciting, and now the challenge is with us software developers to make that you really feel strongly that you want to go back. Whether that's game or whether it's another software or just medium, that remains to be seen, I think. Nobody has created a killer app in VR yet.
Right. But when that happens, when the killer app or apps arrive, how, you know, King of Sweden aside, how mass market do you see it could become? I mean, I guess with mobile gaming, arguably every mobile game is a casual or mass market game. Even the more hardcore or traditional genres are presented as free-to-play games and very accessible. Do you see we could get to that point with virtual reality games, that it is played everywhere and hundreds of games played by huge audiences? It really has that potential to be that mass market.
Well, it's a very different platform from mobile games that I worked with before, obviously, where mobile games is something where you have it with you all the time and you have those small moments that you can play something. VR is appointment gaming, much like the console. So you typically dedicate some time. Now I'm going to sit down and play my games. And so that is a completely different mindset and a different type of experience that you need to cater for there. Game sessions in VR is much longer, typically, than the average mobile session, partially because putting on the headset requires some activation energy. I spoke to Hilmar from CCP Games. He said he felt that going into VR was like going into a scuba kind of thing. And you have this more limited field of view. I thought it was quite accurate. It's still very early on with VR. All the hardware is very much first generation. But as a developer, I think it's extremely interesting to go into that early R&D phase and try to see what will be meaningful to do a longer period of time. And I definitely draw a lot of parallel to in the '99 when I started with making mobile games and discovering what works and what doesn't work.
And yeah, let's go straight to that question then. You know, I guess when mobile, or let's say the smartphone appeared, so 2008 was the iPhone, there was a lot of taking console game forms and genres and console controls and squeezing them onto phones, and it didn't necessarily work, and game developers had to kind of learn a new way to make games for the platform. So thinking about the move from mobile now to VR, whether that's mobile VR or other types of VR, do you feel, what lessons can people take from making mobile games successful and apply to VR?
Yeah, I think that there is definitely a lot of learnings to be made, and you know, we don't have to learn everything. We don't have to make every mistake that people have already made before. So one of them that I think is very typical for software engineering is that small teams create much better experience when you don't know exactly what you want to build. And that's often very, very true for games. And Unity and Unreal are fantastic for that. We used to need much bigger teams because you needed really talented C++ programmers, and you do a lot of the same things multiple times that Unity and other games engines basically give you for free. So that is great for research purposes because you can be a small number of people and you can move much quicker into the direction the game kind of wants to go, more generic. So short iterations time is one of the things that we make sure that our process contains a lot. We look at the game and from a new perspective say, okay, what is the most urgent thing to do right now? And that's one of the things. So it's very difficult to work with an external party that is financing your production, because it's very hard to exactly sketch down from the beginning or in a contract what it is your software will do. And it's hard for somebody to take that leap of faith and say, okay, I'll give you $1 million to do this, whatever that turns out to be.
Don't give me $1 million. So I wanted to, you know, I guess the other great learning of mobile was the establishing of free-to-play, and free-to-play in many different forms. Obviously, there are some dominant forms of free-to-play, but there was, at a time, quite a diversity of monetization models. How do you see that transferring to VR? Does the fact that it's virtual reality make no difference to the monetization? Do you think free-to-play will be the best approach, or are we going to see new VR monetization models appear?
This is unfortunately like a very complex and big topic, I think. Like free-to-play is such a beast of a thing. It means a lot of different things. But from primarily how I look at it as an entrepreneur and a businessman is that you typically don't want to leave that purchasing decision moment in the hands of somebody else. So you don't want, to be in the hands of Steam or Apple or Google to make you that money. You want to control it yourself, and the best way to do that is get players in with the least possible barrier, and then have that purchasing moment inside your own world or game. But it is immensely difficult because it means running a storefront with everything that entails. And it's a completely different job than creating a great game. And those two are often very, very hard to put together. So if you want to experiment and make great game experience, it's much simpler to just have the premium approach and say, okay, somebody else is going to sell this game for me on platform. And hopefully they'll feature me so I get the visibility that I need to get in the hands of players. Because outside those feature lists, it's very, very hard, as you probably all know, to get some attention to your apps. With a billion different or a million different games on a smartphone today, it's hard to stand out and find your audience.
And I guess we're not quite facing the same discoverability problem with virtual reality. So on that note, when you look at the types of VR experiences today's developers are making, do you feel that more could be seizing the opportunity of more mass market content? Or perhaps, I just wondered how, if you think enough game developers and content developers are recognizing this opportunity for not necessarily hardcore games, but more mass market VR content.
I think that it's going to. It takes a lot of experimentation at this early phase, and going for hardcore games, I think, is perhaps easier in a way. It's easy because you have a lot of people there, like myself, who wants to see certain games in a place where you could be inside that game world. So I'm very happy to see that there is people doing that, but I don't think it's not right for our company. We want to bring more people, more different groups to virtual reality than the traditional hardcore gamer. Okay,
and you mentioned your company, and you've got 2 released accessible VR games, and I think people know you as the businessman and entrepreneur, but you are also a game designer. So, got another question I feel a bit meek about how big it is, but what's been your key learning from a game design perspective in making Bait and Wonderglade? And, I guess sharing that with any game developers here, kind of your top tip for making accessible VR content.
Yeah, that's kind of big. I'm always very open to share what I've learned. The biggest problem is that it's hard to. It's often very concrete things. One of the things that comes to mind is one of the things that we've seen is we tend to believe that you're seeing through this tunnel and you have your focus point, and you notice when you do things that people are watching a very, very, very small area. So even if you go just a couple of centimeters above that and try to convey information, they won't see it. And it's a lot of people are talking about how difficult it is to make user interface to virtual reality because it's very, very new and it's unproven. And a lot of our research money goes into this we think that we just put it there and people will see it, and they don't, because they are only watching such an enormously small area. That's one of the things that comes into mind. Other than that, we had very interesting, we just released a basketball game for Wonderglade that turned out to be our most popular minigame. And we started out thinking, oh, it's a big, great idea. A lot of people like basketball, and it'd be very intuitive to use the controller in that way that you just throw something. Turns out that the controller is actually very bad at mimicking the throwing of something for several reasons on how the hardware works. And you could do it quite well if you, as a player, use this like pretty hard pushing up. But this is a really dangerous thing to do when you don't see. You could really see people hurting other one by pushing quickly up in this direction. So we had a lot of doubts on that concept, but eventually we had enough cheating and made it simple enough, so it really felt like it was working. And I'm very happy we kind of powered through that valley of despair in that development cycle.
Great, so power through the valley of despair. Now, I have plenty more questions, but we only have a few minutes left, and with me being a games journalist, I basically make a living out of hassling people with questions.
Thank you. Adam from Basement VR. Recently, we've released our social application for virtual reality, and we are facing a lot of problems with getting user feedback. Do you have any expertise in using external tools for getting like a feedback from the user, or just improving your analytics inside your game on this, very early stage of
I think it's a very important thing, right? To get the data, what's going on. That's something that was our #1 priority. That was why we released the first games that we did. So right now we are using a combination of inviting quite a lot of people to the office and trying the games in the phase. The first kind of testing we do internally, and that, I would say, is the most important part, right? We're getting to something that is playable and trying it, and you immediately realize 97% of all the problems. But then you have the second phase, and it's very good to invite people that don't know what this is that they're trying and see how they're reacting to it. And then kind of the third phase is to see what happens when people download it without having any relationship to you or the hardware and everything else. And that is super complex, right? Because even if you have a lot of good measuring points, it's hard to discover what is actually going on. And we've been using some tools there, and one of those tools was recently acquired by another company, so now we can't use that tool and have to convert it to something else, which is kind of a pain. But that's how the industry works sometimes. But that last step is something that is holy grail in the sense of you keep looking for the best way, but it's just so hard and so easy to get tricked. Looking at what you think is, this probably means that people are not doing this. And then that's not what it means at all. So I still, personally, as a game designer, I still like best giving the game to somebody and just watching them and seeing what's going on. And the sound helps us quite a lot there, because we don't, you can't see what they're seeing. So having a lot of good audio cues, so you know what's going on, has been really important.
Thanks. I have a question about the Daydream platform, and especially the controller. For me personally, this, like as a consumer, not as a developer, this has been a game changer. I've only had a Daydream device for a little over a month, but finally mobile VR is fun for me. And I'm just so amazed to see that with just a handful of games available on Daydream right now, so many smart people have come up with very different metaphors of interacting with the game world with this very limited controller, which only has like rotational tracking, no positional tracking. And you guys are doing a great job of like giving the having arcadey agility games work for the controller, and other people use the controller for puzzle games, and you have different ways of moving an item in the world or moving the world around you. It just seems like to blow up creativity. Do you think that this is now a good way of interacting in VR, or do you think it's still limiting and we really need an Oculus Touch controller before things are going to get really fun on mobile?
Yeah, I think we're, you know, if you get your hands into VR, that's going to change everything. But this is the first where we can actually be in the 3D world with the controller. So this is a huge step towards having hands. We have a hate-love relationship with this type of controller. It is very, you know, a lot of time is spent from our point of view trying to get something to work, and it doesn't work the way. Internally, we speak about it a lot as the best way is actually using it as a laser pointer. That's the thing that we know works well. It's easy to relate to players. Everything else is expensive in terms of experimenting a lot. But on the other hand, as you say, once you succeed, it can really bring another dimension to a game that you're utilizing the controller in a creative way, and we're definitely super happy that it's there rather than just a button input, for instance, or forcing some players to play with a joystick. One of the great design decisions with the Daydream is obviously to require the controller to be there, so you know that 100% of your players has it. So you don't get into this peripheral problems when 5 to 25% of your audience has the controller you want them to have.
Great, and with that, we are just about out of time. So thank you, audience, for your attendance, your attention, and your questions. And thank you, Tommy, for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.